A few months ago, I went outside to check the mail. I have one of those really old mailboxes that that are just left right outside my house. I left it through the mail and it was bills and flyers and magazines. I then noticed something else at the bottom of the mailbox, a videotape. Now, sometimes I find things in the mailbox like bugs, garbage, and things like that. A few years back, we have found a squirrel that had made a nest in there. But a videotape? Really? I picked it up and looked at it. It looked like a normal videotape. I looked inside and there was a shiny sticker of a butterfly on it. I peeked into the mailbox hoping to find some explanation for the videotape, but I found nothing else. I walked inside and set up my VCR, which had been collecting dust by then. I answered the tape and waited till it was finished rewinding. And when it finished, I pressed play on the remote. It was 10:30 at night, and I grabbed some popcorn and a soda and plopped myself onto the sofa. I was really wanting to watch this mysterious tape. The video started with one of those THX logos. I had last seen that incident when I was maybe about 6 or 7. What followed was an advert to the theme park Marineland, an old advert from the 1990s. During that advert, the screen kept flashing. I couldn't make out what was flashing because it only lasted for a quarter of a second. The Marineland ad was cut off and then it went to pitch black. I was about to rewind the tape, what was flashing, when a familiar thing came up. It was PBS Kids. There was a brief advert for the Chuck E. Cheese. I had smiled as I watched my childhood return home to me. Suddenly it faded to the show what was coming up next. Coming up next, Dragon Tales on PBS Kids. I'm sure most of you guys know the show Dragon Tales. It's better that you've seen at least 5 episodes of the show before you understand any of this. The intro of the show started and everything was right, except there was no sound. It cut off in the middle of the intro and then cut to a picture of Max sitting on a chair with the words Dragon Tales crudely written above him in red. The thing that frightened me the most was Max's facial expression. He was pale and his eyes were tiny. He sat there as if he was trying to smile, but he needed to cry, almost like an expression of a man about to hang himself. The episode started and it showed the outside view of Max and Emmy's house, as it always does. The sky was a dark red and the sun was an orangish color. Max walked in holding his elbow. "Ow!" he exclaimed. "I bumped my elbow on the table." Emmy just stood at him, and she had a frown on her face. "Well, maybe if you'd fucked me, then your elbow wouldn't hurt so much," she replied. I was shocked of what I just heard. She had just said what I thought she had just said. More significantly, there were no credits or episode title. Then Max said, "Emmy, Mommy told us not to use that word." Emmy took a deep breath before she could speak. Max screamed, "Don't do it, Emmy!" he cried. "I don't want to live through this anymore." Do what, I wondered. What was Emmy going to do? I was starting to get a bit scared at this point. I knew I was not watching a normal episode of Dragon Tales. They continued their conversation, but the rest was barely audible. Finally, Emmy suggested in a clear voice, "Why don't we go to Dragonland?" The dragon wallpaper was black and bright red. The dragons on the wall with gigantic smiles on their faces. They held each other in hand and chanted, I wish, with all my heart, to fly with dragons in a land apart." After they had said that they arrived at Dragonland, they looked for their friends. They found Ord sitting behind a rock. Max approached him. "Hey Ord, want to play with my new truck?" he asked. Ord turned around. I could hear bits of the radio static. At first I couldn't hear what the voices were saying, but I could hear what the man on the radio was saying. All I heard was, "Well, Jim, this is a very terrible situation we have here. Police had confirmed the Air Force One was hijacked by a few members of Al-Qaeda, and the plane was crashed into the Statue of Liberty in New York, the city where President Obama was supposed to appear. We are unsure of that plane or if there was any casualties. I don't know if there was anything else, but all I could tell you is that the Statue of Liberty is in flames and the plane carrying President Barack Obama." During that time, the radio was playing Ord was sitting behind the rock. He had no expression on his face. He was just sitting there, lifeless. He wasn't dead, but his face almost looked like it. I thought back to Max's expression on the chair. Once the static ended, Ord walked away. He was expressionless as he walked through a straight line around Dragonland. The sky was in blood red. Ord gave a slick smile. A gigantic scream erupted out of nowhere, and then it cut to a zoom in of a photo of a realistic image, now emaciated Ord lying dead, with his eyes ripped out and a message carved onto his head. In Ord's blood, it said, "Hail Satan." It then cut to black at that second, and then it faded to a church. The bell rang, and the distorted deep tone. The sky was still in blood red. The radio static came back. Breaking news, an auditorium proclaimed. President Barack Obama is dead. He was killed this afternoon in a plane crash along with Vice President Joe Biden and 55 other government officials. Also, that plane was rock and roll and legend Chuck Berry and 40 other people. Air Force One was hijacked by 5 Al-Qaeda members. Those names have not been confirmed, but the Archman's voice shook with terror as he spoke. This is a terrible, shocking day for not only the United States of America, for the entire world. The response was, and after that it just went to static. It showed paintings of inside the church. At that moment I assumed it had something to do with the death of Obama. It then zoomed in on the coffin. The photo was realistic as the voice of Zach suddenly shouted, "Cassie, no!" It then cut to black and white in the video. It was silent, except for random beeping noises, and by silent, all you could hear was a film projector running. It showed Cassie walking around in the white background. She just kept walking. The beeping sounds got louder. Cassie stopped, and she walked over towards the screen. I could hear her breathing. Her eyes were bloodshot, her teeth were broken, her hair was shaved off. At this point, I thought Cassie could hear me. She opened her mouth, and what followed was the most ear-piercing, loudest sound that I have ever heard in my life. It wasn't like a scream, but a really messed up beeping sound that was louder than any human can hear. My ears sometimes still ring from that. That's how bad it was. In fact, I'm lucky I'm not half deaf. Cassie continued to stare at me. I was getting kinda scared at this moment. I didn't want to watch it anymore. I tried to shut off. Said Cassie in the voice of a crying and choking woman. We must pray to Satan. And then it faded to black. It faded back to a dragon tune. For those of you who don't know, the format has 2 10-minute episodes and a song in between. I hoped that the nightmare had ended. It hadn't. The song was an origin track that was being looped. The video quality wasn't good, so I couldn't see what was going on. There were about 50 dragons in a gigantic circle, chanting, "Cassie, Cassie, Cassie." Cassie then smiles and jumps into the fire. The video quality suddenly improves. It shows Cassie's flesh burning. She looked at me and proclaimed, "You did this to me!" Before her skin was burnt into ashes and her entire body turned into rubble. It actually showed her being burnt. Suddenly, hundreds of dragons pounced on her remains. They began to scratch at each other, and they were devouring each other. It showed dragons biting into other dragons' skulls, dragons ripping off the flesh of other dragons, and fleshless dragons crying blood. I began to wonder how this was even a dragon tune. The scene then changed back to Max and Amy back at their house. "I need my truck!" exclaimed Max. "Well, hurry up!" said Emmy in an angry voice. Max then fell into the toy box while he was searching. Emmy, help! It's locked! Help me!" Max screamed. He was crying, like actual real crying. Emmy screamed, "It's stuck!" You could feel the pain as Max panicked to get out. To make a long story short, he didn't. It then cuts to a gigantic cage, and it shows Zach and Wheezy on all fours drinking water from the dish. They began to sing. The singing was muffled, so I really couldn't understand the words, but after a while, the song became more clear, and the voices of Zach and Wheezy now sounded like an old man with a gruff voice and a little girl no older than 4. The last verse went something like this. "Praise thee, devil, for he is thou. Let him pass possesses unto vow. For pain and torture we all hear. You could see, it's better you than him and me." Then they paused. The little girl started to cry. It was actual crying, not acting. Stand up, the man said in a gruff voice. I said, stand the hell up so I could hurt you again, the man shouted. You could actually hear the man and the little girl in the background. You could feel her pain as she was being forced to do something messed up. Her screams and cries echoed. Finally, the screams and cries stopped. Stand up, you filthy piece of shit, the man yelled. I want my mommy, the girl cried. She was screaming. Out of the blue, a loud gunshot rang. The little girl continued to scream loudly. 5 shots were fired. You could hear the whispering of the old man's voice. Shit, what am I going to do with the body? The video then cut to a surveillance camera room, and then there was videos of playing of different angles of Air Force One crashing into the Statue of Liberty. I began to wonder how the girl's murder and the terrorism both acted connected together. It then cut to pitch black. Suddenly, the face came out of the shadows, and it was a terrifying figure from one of my worst nightmares from when I was 5. He looked like Satan. His eyes were bulging out, and he had a big smile on his face. He opened his mouth and let out that ear-piercing scream I had heard earlier. I was able to stop the video now. I didn't want to face that terrible demon anymore. I shut the VCR off and stayed up all night on my computer. I threw out the videotape, but after I took some photos of the episode before garbage day, I made sure the video was in the garbage. It wasn't. I searched around the house and it was nowhere to be seen. I never seen that tape again, and I warn you to never pick up any mysterious tapes you find.